The most sacred and important temple in the whole of the Inca Empire was at Cuzco. It was dedicated to Viracocha, and it was called Coricancha, or the Golden Enclosure. The Spanish built Santo Domingo Cathedral on its ruins. But the ancient walls can still be seen both from inside and outside the latter-day colonial church. The walls are still imposing and very cleverly crafted. But the stones themselves are much smaller than in the other structures we had visited. More a building that Inca architects might have designed. There are tunnels under the church. A story tells of how some boys got lost in them in 1920. After a whole week, only one of them re-emerged, injured and confused. He died soon afterwards, clutching a solid gold cob of corn. There are no written records to confirm the story, but the people of Cuzco assure us it's true. We managed to get permission to visit the digs made by other researchers who had been trying to unravel the puzzle of the mysterious tunnels and climb down under the church. We followed the tunnel for a while, but are brought up short. The tunnel is blocked. Later, we're told that the excavations were stopped because of the risk of undermining the foundations of the church above. We wonder whether the Coricancha tunnels led to a more impressive network of underground tunnels, perhaps those that connected Cuzco, Sacsayhuaman, and other places even further away. But we'll have to wait for answers to these questions. The fact is, the tunnels exist, and their existence is backed up by ancient traditions.
Traditionally, the tunnels are supposed to have gone from Cusco towards Quito in Ecuador. And from the south, they went towards what is today Bolivia, towards Chile, towards the forest, towards Brazil. They went everywhere. Unfortunately, some of them were blocked up for safety reasons when they were discovered. So nowadays, it's very difficult to find the entrances. I know, I'm sure, that they exist. I saw some of them with my father when I was a child. And I know that there are tunnels under the Catholic churches.
We discover that another church in Cuzco has tunnels, the Church of the Jesuits. It was built in 1576 on the foundations of the Amarucancha, the royal palace of the Inca ruler Huayna. When the Spanish arrived, Huayna two sons, Huáscar and Atahualpa, were waging a civil war for control of the empire. This helped the Spanish conquer the Inca kingdom. The church houses some important works of art. One of the most important pieces is the altar carved in cedar wood and covered in gold. It was by the Italian sculptor Bernardo Vitti. After long talks, we managed to get permission to explore underground this church too. There's a small, beautifully decorated chapel under the altar. This is where the trapdoor that accesses the tunnels is. The heavy cover hasn't been lifted for a long time. We're very excited as we get ready. This is the first time cameras have been allowed to film the tunnels. The entrance is small. and difficult to get into. Once we manage to climb down, we get a disappointment. The tunnels are blocked after only a few meters. The ecclesiastical authorities ordered them to be blocked for security reasons. The tunnels run under the city and in the past have been used by thieves as a way into the church. But once more they confirm that the Inca's sacred places were connected by a network of tunnels. Did the Incas build them? Ancient tradition believes not, and we find echoes in the chronicles of the conquistadores themselves. In 1571, Juan Polo de Ondegardo wrote, "The city of Cuzco was the home and residence of the gods. Every fountain, well, and wall concealed a mystery." We leave Cuzco on the trail of more Peruvian mysteries. The fortress of Ollantaytambo dominates the valley of Urubamba, clinging to a hill about 300 feet high. It was the Incas' main fortification to defend the sacred valley. It was here that Pizarro experienced one of his few defeats during his campaign to conquer the huge empire of the sun. Characterized by its terraces used for farming, the settlement developed up to the summit of the hill. It was an important military, religious, and agricultural center about 60 miles to the northwest of Cuzco. About 2/3 of the way up the steep steps that lead to the top of the hill, the familiar walls appear with their usual astonishing craftsmanship. Extremely large, heavy, skillfully worked, polygonal stones fitting perfectly together with no mortar or any other type of cement. Again, we wonder, is this Inca work? The archaeologists say it is, but on one wall we find a stretch that has been repaired. It must have been done by the Incas, but strangely, the repair work has been carried out using much smaller stones, and the level of craftsmanship is much rougher. Why? Perhaps the Inca architects had forgotten their once sophisticated techniques, or were the original builders not Incas? That seems to be the most likely answer. There are a row of 10 trapezoidal niches on the wall of the terrace where the main entrance once was. The joins are incredible, with absurd angles. They look almost ironical. Did they have a practical purpose, or were they just showing off the craftsmanship of the builders? As we climb higher, the walls still show the same level of incredible workmanship as the ones we've just seen. On top of the hill, we find the ruins of the houses which once belonged to the Inca priests and nobles, while the populace lived in houses further down. There are other remains on the slopes of the hill in front. Archaeologists say that they were once grain storage warehouses. But although they are very interesting, our attention is attracted by something else. On the top of the hill, a series of huge red porphyry monoliths form a mad puzzle, lying scattered around on the ground in no apparent order, some of them weighing dozens of tons. Some are accurately carved, others are obviously unfinished. An amazing structure rears up out of this chaotic scene. 6 enormous monoliths perfectly aligned along a southeasterly vector and perhaps uniquely separated by spaces in the same stone, a unique example of craftsmanship. Red porphyry is a very hard stone, as heavy as granite. The monoliths are about 13 feet high, 6.5 feet wide, and 3 to 6 feet thick. They weigh from 25 to 50 tons. They were quarried from a nearby mountain, so obviously they were cut from the rock face, taken down into the valley, and then dragged 328 feet up to their destination. How? Archaeologists mention thousands of workers, ropes, tree trunks, and potatoes used as lubricant to help the massive monoliths slide. That's right, potatoes. The structure is obviously incomplete, as the blocks scattered haphazardly around the summit confirm. but nobody knows what its intended use was or why it was never finished. Another enigma puzzles us in the midst of so many mysteries, a symbol carved on one of the monoliths. A pyramid rising in steps, the same symbol also found in Egypt. Is it just a coincidence? The Incas certainly had no knowledge of the Egyptians, but could both civilizations have been inspired by the same matrix? In his book, Operation Fawcett, the legendary explorer Colonel Percy Fawcett wrote, "The Incas inherited their fortresses and cities from an earlier civilization," and Garcilaso de la Vega, in his chronicles, tells us how they had been erected in the First Age before the Incas. The First Age? What does it mean? Was it the age when the gods could fly? The age when the survivors of an ancient, highly developed civilization settled in Peru?
We have evidence of this because here in Peru we've studied the pre-Inca cultures. 10,000 years ago there was the Chimu civilization, which means those from Mu. Further south, there was the Muchic civilization, sometimes called Mochica, but the correct name is Muchic, or descendants of Mu, coming from Mu.
We leave from the little station at Ollantaytambo. The train wends its slow way next to the river through the Urubamba Valley, the sacred valley of the Incas. The countryside is interesting, harsh and wild. It gets greener the further we go. Finally, we arrive in Machu Picchu, sacred myth of the past and present. We get off at the station in Aguascalientes. This little town is at the foot of the mountain where the lost city of the Incas is sited. It has grown rapidly in a chaotic fashion, thanks to the influx of tourists from all over the world. We shoulder the equipment we need to film and set off towards the archaeological site. The road we take is the steepest. It leads to one of the highest points which dominate the city. The climb is tiring. We still haven't got acclimatized to the altitude here. But the magic of the place has already enthralled us. We're impatient. We can't wait to see the legendary monuments of one of the most fascinating cities of the ancient world. Machu Picchu, the lost city of the Incas, emerged from the mists of time in 1911. The American explorer Hiram Bingham, professor at Yale University, is the author of the discovery. As a matter of fact, the Peruvian archaeologist Agustín Lizarraga had discovered the ruins before him in 1902, and two families of campesinos were found living there, farming the ancient terraces left by the Incas. Bingham had the merit of studying the site scientifically and telling the world about this amazing urban structure.
Without taking any merit away from Bingham, he was the one who made Machu Picchu world famous, but it was the Peruvians who guided him to Machu Picchu. That's important to remember. There were people here before, and people came to Machu Picchu from Cusco many years before Mr. Bingham.
When was it built? What was it for? Was it a fortified settlement? A refuge for the noble Inca class, or a city dedicated to the cult of the gods? There are many theories, but no sure answers. Yet the stones speak. Machu Picchu is a silent voice with many tales to tell if you listen carefully. Machu Picchu, a saga in stone at 7,800 feet above sea level, is perfectly integrated with its surroundings. So much so that it looks almost like a natural feature rather than a man-made construction. The logic behind so many great works. the sacred rock reproduces the profile of the nearby mountain. In a fantastic play of light and shadows, the profile of an indios emerges from the shape of the mountains against the skyline. An incredible coincidence. In the Condor Temple, sculpted and natural elements blend to bring the sacred animal to life. Its wings of stone capture a moment of flight for all eternity. The Water Temple. Water, another sacred element for the Incas. The mysterious mortar room. It's in what is known as the industrial area. The Incas were believed to have dyed material in the two rocks shaped like mortars, material they then dried in the cylinders protruding from the walls. But is this the right explanation? Magical Machu Picchu, scattered fragments from a lost arcane world. The houses of the ordinary people were near the agricultural sector, with its barns and characteristic terraces. The houses are stone-built, small and simple. Once through the main gates of the city, the path winds through some narrow streets and then leads to a strangely shaped building. Bingham called it the Torreon, or tower. Today it's known as the Temple of the Sun. It's built to a semicircular plan with two trapezoidal windows set in the curved wall. One faces north and the other faces east. They can be used to determine the summer and winter solstices. There is a niche with structures carved into the lower part of the building. Its purpose was to determine important astronomic events. The Torreon is more than a temple. It's an astronomic calendar in stone, and it's not the only one in Machu Picchu. The temple with the three windows is in the mid-level of the city, and the alignment of the openings enables the equinoxes to be calculated. The same as the monolithic stones of Stonehenge in England. Stone is the great protagonist of the ancient world. But on a higher level, behind a three-walled building reached by a flight of roughly hewn steps, we find an even more sophisticated astronomic structure. The Intihuatana is a polygonal structure cut into the living rock. The precision is extraordinary. A spur of rock like a cog on the upper surface is perfectly aligned to the northeast-southeast. An accurate sundial for calculating the solstices and the equinoxes. Machu Picchu is incredible. It's more like a huge stone computer for astronomical calculus rather than a city.
It's true that here at Machu Picchu there are important sectors both on the lower and higher levels. The actual position of the city, it was placed in the best position to receive solar energy. That's very clear in Machu Picchu. You can see both the sunrise and the sunset. It's positioned to receive as much solar energy as possible all year round.
Could the Inca Empire have developed such sophisticated knowledge? These are precise technical instruments, not simple ritual symbols. They're backed up by precise geometrical calculations, mathematics, and astronomy. Only a civilization that developed over a long period of time could have produced anything like them. Machu Picchu means the old mountain, but how old actually is it? According to the archaeologists, the city was built in the 15th century. But in 1930, Professor Rolf Müller from the University of Potsdam in Germany studied the astronomical alignments of the Torreon, the temple with the three windows, and the Intihuatana, and established that they had been built sometime between 4000 and 2000 BC. These incredible dates were confirmed by further studies carried out by the astronomers Deborn and White from Arizona University. Does this mean that here, as in other sites, the Incas settled on pre-existing structures? The dates calculated by the astronomers confirm this theory. Local oral traditions that have been handed down to the present day also tell of ancient gods who initiated civilization and built wonderful cities, gods who could fly, perhaps the survivors of the highly developed civilization of Mu. On the sacred square of Machu Picchu, the Temple of the Three Windows, the main temple and the other structures are all built from perfectly fitted together polygonal blocks. The by now familiar joins, already seen in Cuzco and Sacsayhuaman. we find similar differences in other parts of the city. The difference in style and technique used to build Machu Picchu are glaringly obvious. Carefully crafted monoliths make up the older part and rougher workmanship on the later parts. Once more, we find different styles and levels of technical ability. Were they built by different people? How else can we explain the difference? But we have other mysteries to unravel. We want to know if there were any underground tunnels at Machu Picchu, and are told that when maintenance work was being done on the sacred square, where the main temple is, the workmen heard echoes as if the ground below was hollow. Some digging was done, but only to a depth of a few feet, without finding anything. Perhaps the cavities are further down. A guide who heard about our research said that there were some tunnels in another area. He offers to take us there. After a difficult scramble, we come to the narrow entrance. The young guide climbs down first. It's a tight squeeze. Even passing the equipment we need to explore and film is difficult. We can't really take all we need, but we decide to make do. Once we're in, walking isn't easy. The tunnel is very irregular. It seems as if it had only been started and not completed. It's very damp, and the ground underfoot is very slippery, so we have to be careful. After a certain distance, the tunnel is blocked, and we can't go any further. Getting back is even more difficult, but we have the proof that someone had created underground tunnels at Machu Picchu too. The sun is setting as we emerge from the narrow tunnel. The ancient city is hauntingly beautiful and had shared some of its secrets with us. Our minds are echoing with the words of Colonel Fawcett. The Indios tribes inherited the traditions of a great civilization. Perhaps they were the ancestors of the Incas, perhaps a mysterious race who left behind the gigantic remains that the invading Incas later incorporated into their own buildings. Historical civilizations all have a common matrix, albeit a forgotten one. Even Colonel Fawcett was convinced of the truth of this. The huge ruins scattered around Peru and other countries around the world are an obvious clue, confirmed by their identical construction technique. The myths and traditions of many ancient people have handed down the memory of this civilization. There are mysterious tunnels at these ancient sites. Perhaps these clues are still not enough to prove the existence of a lost civilization which gave rise to all successive civilizations. There is still a lot to discover, and the research goes on.